Hello, everybody, and welcome to another webinar held by the ASI. Some of you are familiar names I see here in our room, and some are new faces, and so welcome. These are events that we host every 6 to 8 weeks, generally one with a presenter, and then the community itself meets. And these are free and they are open to everybody, so that we create a sense of community to support each other in this learning, creative environment. And so I'd like you to just take a moment to leave the rest of the world behind so that you can be here fully, all parts of you present, for as long as you're able to stay on this webinar. Just let go of anything on your to-do list or that you didn't get done. Feel your feet on the floor, your butt on the chair. Let your body feel heavy. And enjoy being inside your body. We have a topic today that is central to some of the work of the ASI. And to introduce our speaker that we're seriously lucky to have today, Kimberly.
Yes, I am thrilled to welcome you all here today into this moment and to introduce my dear friend and mentor and inspiration, Dr. Terry O'Fallon. I'm a member of the ASI board, and it is such a heart calling for me. And the work, and in full disclosure, Terry and I also do some work together and co-teach together. So just putting that out there. So obviously I am biased in all the best ways. Terry has been a leader in education, and particularly human development and adult education, for over 40 years. Her history has spanned from preschool up to principal and superintendent. She's taught at multiple colleges. She's been involved in, at least, I don't know how many research projects, Terry, at this point, dozens, more than dozens, a couple dozen at least, different research projects. And really, her penultimate, I think we can say, theory is really an integration of the Jane Levenger stage, which is a scholastic, grounded, well-validated research theory in the field of developmental science and developmental psychology, and awakening. So what we would call developmental stages and states, and really an integration of the best of developmental theory, integral theory, and spiritual theory in this stages theory. And I can say she right now is the queen out there in certain circles of soul processes and think tanks. And the most important thing, I could go on and on, obviously, about Terry. I think the most impactful thing of this deeply validated theoretical offering that you're going to hear about today is its application. This is a very pragmatic matrix of compassion and consciousness that we can use as spiritual leaders and as spiritual aspirants to wake up and grow up ourselves. And it has a real application to our everyday life. So I learn something new every time. Terry's always evolving and recreating her model, and I'm just thrilled to hand it over to you, Terry, and welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Kimberly. I very much appreciate being here and seeing you all. My goodness, and many of these faces I know. Hope that I get to know all of you anyway. Before we start, I want you to know that I have a master's degree in spiritual direction, and I wrote that paper. I think it was in 2010. That thesis. I've updated it about 3 or 4 times as this whole field of the relationship between development and spiritual states seems to kind of come into play now. And so when I get it updated, if you want to have it, I would be happy to just share it with you if somebody can collect names for me. I'm hoping to get that done in the next couple of weeks. So Well, I guess let's just take a breath and say, welcome. I'm happy to see you all here. I am really thrilled to give this overview. You know, in an hour and a half, there really isn't any way that I can tell you all of the aspects of development, and you know that. So what I do want to do is give you an overview and a sensibility about how it relates to other really important areas and how it fits in with other really important areas like spirituality and the spiritual path. How does development relate to the sacred? Well, there's these 4 different areas that come up all the time that I know most of you or many of you have already heard of. And that is waking up. The other, waking up is our spiritual path, growing up, cleaning up, and showing up. So there are 4 essential relationships that come up when we look at these 4 areas. When we look at waking up really doesn't happen very well unless you can clean up. I think that Connie gave you a wonderful presentation last time about how some cleaning up needs to happen with spiritual directors and people who are guiding people's spiritual paths. Of course, it also wouldn't do a very good job if you didn't have very good conduct. You can hang around in the timeless boundless and not really help anybody out anywhere. So that's a pretty important one. And then there's growing up. You can wake up quite early. But you can wake up quite early, but if you wake up at an early age or an early stage, all you'll be able to wake up to is what you can see. Now, can you imagine what an 8-year-old can see? They can't really apprehend or take the kinds of perspectives that you all can, and we wouldn't want them to because they need to be kids for a while. But if somebody does happen to wake up at a very early age or stage, then they're oftentimes in a place where they get kind of stuck at that stage because they think they're done. So what we want to see is people who are growing up, waking up, cleaning up, and showing up. Now, when it comes to growing up is really so related to the states that if you don't have these states, you can't even get into the next stage when you're in what we call a meta-aware tier. So growing up depends on waking up. It's very difficult to grow up very far if you've got too many shadow elements. If you have a lot of shadow elements, they drag you down, and it's very, very difficult to continue to grow. Also, the path of conduct. If you have terrible conduct, it's just the very insights that you get when you get to later and later stages helps you have better conduct. So all of these 4 areas are related. We don't want one of them to happen without all the rest. So we want to talk about these 4 essential relationships and and emphasize the growing up part of it, because I know you already know about waking up, you know about cleaning up, and you probably know about cleaning up too. But development has been one that sometimes doesn't show up as much. Whoops, just a second here. So I don't know if you can see this at the top of your screen, but the essential skill that all 4 of these have in common is recognizing. If you are waking up and you don't recognize it, not a whole lot changes. If you are growing up and you don't recognize that there are developmental stages, why would you want to move any further? Why would it make any difference? On the shadow path, one of the things about it is if you don't know you have a shadow, it's pretty hard to clean up, isn't it? So recognizing your shadows, and the other thing is true of the path of conduct, because we can have some very early, beautiful processes, which we'll get to a little bit later in the conduct path, not realizing that there are later developmental levels of these different aspects of conduct that we want everybody to have. So I'm going to start next with the stages matrix. This is the matrix that we use for development. So I'm going to share this information about this, and then we'll see if we can use it a little bit so you can see whether or not it fits some of the things that may be going on in your own life. So notice down the side here, these are the person perspectives. There's 12 of them. 1.0, 1.5, 2.0, 2.5, 3.0, 3.5, and all the way up to 6.5. So person perspectives have a definition. They have a tier definition. It can be either a concrete or subtle or meta-aware. They have a social preference, individual or collective, and then they have a process, a learning sequence, receptive, active, reciprocal, and interpenetrative. Now, this is a lot to get, so it's not like we're going to learn this overnight, but this matrix can help you with this. So if you look at the definition of the 1.0, it's a concrete stage. They really only see the more concrete aspects in life. They don't really see analysis, or they don't see metacognition or any of those kinds of things. Those are more subtle objects. So, and what is their preference? Well, usually, I should say always, their preference is about me. When I'm hungry, I want to eat. When I need my diaper changed, I want to have my diapers changed. When I sleep, I want to sleep. When I want to be held, I want to be held. It's basically all about me. So it's an individual preference. And then what is their learning approach? They're receptive. They can't do anything but receive. There's no other way that they can learn is to receive. Now we get to the next stage. This is 1.5. Here we get to the terrible twos. Okay, well, they're still concrete, aren't they? They still have a very individual focus. It's still all about me. It's even more all about me than it was before. And then they move from receptive to active. So one of these parameters changes, and golly Moses, what a difference it makes when you have somebody that moves from the receptive stage to the active stage. Then we get to 2.0. They're still concrete, but suddenly they move into a collective. Ah, I have a friend. And you all know when kids get a friend and how important that is to have a friend. And it usually happens sometime between the ages of 4 and 6 or 7. There's no one age that these things happen, but there's a range. And then, of course, if they are concrete and collective, they want a relationship. So there's reciprocity there. They start making agreements, and their parents can start counting on them to follow the rules, or they can't count on them following the rules at the active stage. This stage doesn't want to follow the rules. They want to do what they want to do. This stage wants to, they get that the rules are important, because I can't have a friend if we can't make an agreement, and agreements have rules. Then we have the 2.5 stage, which is concrete. It's still collective, but now it's interpenetrative. This is when principles come up. So that people have an opportunity to recognize that there are overarching principles that oftentimes end up being our ethics, the basis of our ethics all through life. They keep those principles so strongly that they're not going to break them even when nobody's looking. That's not true of the reciprocal stage, this one right here. As soon as they're away from one, they're with one friend and then they move to another friend, they're going to follow the rules that friend has. So they're much more apt to move to, follow the crowd. So we have, this is the description of this stage, these concrete stages. So now, if you'll notice, there's upshifts, and this is really important. 1.0 upshifts to 3.0. We go from concrete to subtle. We go from individual to individual, and we go from receptive to receptive. So the only thing that changes here is that the objects that they are working with are subtle now. So they can have analysis. These are people that are around the ages of 20, give or take 2 or 3 years. So they have these subtle capacities, and it changes everything when you have subtle capacities, because now you are still at an individual stage, but you're at a subtle individual stage. And so they like exploring everything. Parents often don't want to know what their kids are doing in college because they try out all kinds of things, and it's kind of scary for parents. At least it was for me when I had my kids in school. This is a very common thing, because experimenting and just trying to figure out who they are at this individual level is very important. And then they're also receiving. They learn through, going to get trainings. They love do-it books. They like everything that can tell them how to do things that they want to do. And this is a very important stage in young adulthood. The 1.5 transcends up into 3.5, and you'll see everything is the same here, except they've moved from the concrete to the subtle. At 2.0, we already know that this is going to be subtle, and we already know that it's going to be collective, and we already know that it's going to be reciprocal. At 2.5, we know that the fourth one here, 4.5, is going to be a subtle, but it's going to be collective and interpenetrative. So we have these 3 tiers here, and there's these upshifts, 1.0, 3.0, 5.0, and they change based on the kinds of objects they can carry in their minds, a concrete objects, a subtle objects, and meta-aware objects. So you can kind of see how this matrix works. We're going to try this out now. Let's look at question number 1. Is the object of awareness concrete, subtle, or meta-aware? Question 2, is the preference an individual or a collective? And question 3 is their learning process, is it more of a receptive process, an active process, a reciprocal process, or an interpenetrative process? So let's go to the next slide. And we're going to look to see how shadow elements fit with that matrix. So there are 3 shadow elements. There are projections, and I know you studied these in the past. I've had several areas where you studied projections anyway. We have projections, introjections, and subpersonalities. Those are the 3 major shadow elements. And what is a projection? It's projecting something in ourselves onto others. Most of the time, we don't know we're doing it. At later levels of development, people catch their projections in the moment, but for the most part of it, we project things on other people all the time without knowing it. Now, one area that people kind of make errors about sometimes is that they think that projections are all bad. There are positive projections. There are neutral projections, and there are challenging projections. And we can learn something from all of them. Then there are introjections. Introjections are the opposite of projections. Instead, like you can imagine a baby here, they take in a projection from someone else. A baby is receptive. They can't do anything but introject. It's just a very, I mean, they are laying there, and if you scream and yell at them, they're going to take that in. If you cuddle and love them, they're going to take that in. If you abandon them, they will take that in. They take it all in. They weren't born with most of the processes that they interject. And some of the processes they interject, some of the things they interject are positive. We hope all of them were positives. Some of them are neutral, and some of them are challenging for them. And those interjects, they can, can hide inside of themselves for quite a number of years. And then the third is subpersonalities or parts. And these are parts of ourselves, like, well, let's say that we decide to go on a diet tomorrow, and we get up and we have our refrigerator full of all kinds of yummy things that are healthy for us. And we've put the cookies in the freezer, but by about 5 o'clock, out come the cookies and you eat the whole plate, right? There is some part inside of you that is saying, oh, you've had such a tough day. You really need to have something nice happen to you. Most of these parts have a positive intention. However, they may not be the intention that you wanted them to have, and they can sabotage you all over the place. So some of these personalities are positive. They all have positive intentions, but some of them may show up because they're very young. These parts can be very young, and so they can get you to do the most childish things sometimes, you know. Sometimes they have a neutral kind of a stance, and sometimes they're very, very challenging, like anger, bouts of anger, or damaging property and things like that. So those are the three, and all of these fit into development, all of them. So I want you to do a little bit of journaling right now. Just you can do it on your computer. You can just take a little sheet of paper and a pencil. Or if you don't want to do either one, you can kind of do these in your mind. It's not that hard. I want you to think of a friend that you admired when you were about the age of 10. Surely you had a friend that was 7, 8, 9, 10, that your first very best friend. Got it? You got that, friend? Now I want you to name one or maybe two qualities that you admired about them. Just hold that quality in your mind. What did you love about them? I'll give you just a second to think. Okay, pick one quality and just hold it there, and we're going to put it on this matrix. Okay, I'd like to have hands raised, and I hope I can see them so I can call on somebody. Who would share with me just the quality? You don't have to share the name of the person or anything, but the quality that you loved in that 7-year-old, 8-year-old, or 9-year-old, or 10-year-old, your best friend, your first best friend. What did you love about them? Somebody raise your hand. I can't see hands, so is there anybody? Jack?
She was chatty and she was great fun to play with.
She was fun to play with. Okay, so would you say that that is a concrete action, a subtle action, or a meta-aware action?
Oh, concrete.
It's okay, so it's concrete. So was it an individual action, or was it a collective action?
Or collective.
Was it receptive, active, or was it reciprocal or interpenetrative?
The third and maybe the fourth.
Okay, so let's look and see what perspective that you were taking. A 2.0. 2.0 is called the rule-oriented stage. So you can see how this can be used to kind of look at people in your direction. And when they're talking about things, they may be talking about things that happened in their childhood. And you can listen to what they're saying, and if they're saying, I had somebody that I loved the way that they played, you say, okay, that's concrete. It's a collective. And the way it sounds like reciprocal. She's talking about somebody that was when she was in the 2.0 level. The 2.0 level is a very important level because that's the first time you have the capacity to analyze anything. This is different from most animals. Most animals can actually do thinking. They can do, I mean, the research they've done on bonobos and apes and chimpanzees, oh my goodness, these are really smart animals. And but they can't analyze yet. So this is the first kind of quality that we need to learn, as well as reciprocity, when it comes to the human mind. Now, the human mind they have these three quadrants, or three tiers. This first tier is a tier where we're just developing the basis for our human mind. When we are born, we have everything that we need for a development, all the way up the developmental scale and all the way up the spiritual scale. We have all of that. But the second tier is the tier where we really develop a lot of the more subtle aspects that we enjoy as adults. We learn to plan for our goals and objectives. We learn to look at the context. We learn about the social construction of reality. We think about projections. We watch presentations like the one I'm doing. You're not going to find many kids doing that, but this is the tier that we do that. And then this third tier transcends and includes these other two tiers, and they start seeing, these people at the third tier start seeing, oh, my mind was making a lot of these things up. I just was telling myself a story there. Before that, they'd have a hard time recognizing that their mind makes things up. So as a spiritual director or a spiritual guide, you could watch to see what they recognize, and then you can see what kind of a perspective they're taking and where they are on this developmental process. Now, even though this is a matrix, the stages model actually is more like a balloon, because it has individual, collective, it has interiors, it has diagonals. And so a baby is born perfect. It just has a small balloon. And as we get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, we blow the balloon up. But no one would ever say that a baby is less important because it has a smaller balloon than you are, right? So this is not a ladder. This stage model is not a ladder. It's a ladder that works with balance between individual, collective, balance between your interior and your exteriors, balance in your processes, balance in your development, with your shadow, with your cleaning up, and with your showing up. All of that is balanced in this model. So let's go to the next journaling exercise. Now, I want somebody else to raise their hand this time. I want you to think of someone you admire now. What do you love about that person? What is one quality that you love about that person? And somebody raise their hand on the raise hand. Carolyn. I saw you do that before, Carolyn. I just missed you. Can you turn your mic on?
I bet that would help a lot. Sure. So the person, actually, I was smiling because they have one quality in common, and that is they're both brilliant.
They're both what?
And brilliant.
They're brilliant.
Yeah. So, the person I'm thinking of most that in my life now, not only brilliant with meaning the capacity to carry a lot of information of diverse, very widely read, etc., deeply spiritual, an activist that has global impact in the work that he and his wife do, really an embodiment of body, mind, spirit working, together. That's what I love about this person.
So, Carolyn, are you brilliant?
Sometimes.
Right? See? You see your projection on him?
Yeah, well, maybe.
Yes. So, aren't you spiritual? Why would you be here if you weren't spiritual?
True. Yeah.
Get it?
Yeah.
Do you have an impact someplace in your own life on other people?
Sure. Yeah.
Can you see that projection?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I
So,
walked right into that one, didn't I?
yes, you did. This is called a positive projection.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah.
there's something about positive projections, though. In shadow, they're hidden from you. In other words, you're going to see it in the other guy, but you won't see it in yourself. So sometimes what happens when you have a positive projection is that you see it all around you, but you don't see it in yourself. And so you have that quality of the seeds for it there, but you don't grow it and develop it because you're focusing on everybody else having it and not you. Only you can say whether that's happening to you or not. But perhaps you can notice if some of these qualities that you see in other people are ones that you do have that you just never noticed before, and start cultivating them. We have a calling and almost a responsibility to grow up our positive qualities. That is so important because we'll be much more helpful. See, now we can do this with the negative too. I can say, oh, that person is such a gossip. Then I have to point it back to me and say, I guess I'm a gossip too, That's the thing with these projections. You point the figure out there and it could be a neutral one. Oh, she made her bed this morning. Oh, I made my bed this morning too, So there's just looking for those positive things, catching yourself. That's the recognition part. Can you see how you have to recognize that you're doing it? And then pointing it back to yourself. So let's put one of those qualities out. Okay. So let's look at the question one. Is brilliance a concrete object, a subtle object, or a meta-aware object, do you think, Carolyn?
Well, definitely subtle and can be meta-aware for sure.
Yes. Well, let's use subtle to start with. Okay. So would you say that brilliance is an individual or a collective capacity?
It is individual, and when it's shared, it becomes collective.
Yes.
So if you're a teacher or something like that, then I think it moves into the collective.
Yes. But the quality itself of brilliance is usually individual.
Mm-hmm.
And then is it an active quality? Is it a receptive quality? Is he receiving his brilliance? Is he active with his brilliance? Is he reciprocal with his brilliance? Or is he interpenetrative with his brilliance?
Remind me of interpenetrative. I mean, certainly active and reciprocal as well. Teaching and learning.
Okay.
At the same time. What's the interpenetrative again?
Interpenetrative is when he has, well, it's like interpenetrative is like seeing your projections and not having anybody have to remind you or tell you, can you see so do you think he can see his projections? You might know, but you might not know.
I'm aware of some of it, sure.
Yeah. So in that case, let's say that he can see his projection. So in that case, subtle, collected, interpenetrative. This is 4.5. This is teal. This is one of the later stages. It's a late stage. Now, you can also have someone who's very, very brilliant. They're subtle individual, but when you look down this panel, you can see that they take that brilliance out and are in reciprocity with it and or interpenetrative, and you would have to decide whether or not they can see their own projections on when they reflect on them. So this is a very, very late stage. And as a spiritual director, you might have somebody talking about themselves, or by they may be talking about somebody else, and they may be projecting on somebody else. They may be projecting on you. They may say to you, "Oh, you're so brilliant." Have you ever had anybody compliment you like that? Any of your directees? You can point them back to them and say, if you see that in me, it has to be in you. You see that? That gives them greater self-esteem, and it helps them learn something about themselves. On the other hand, if they're talking about somebody gossiping and doing all of these things that are challenging, you might know that that might be an area of projection that they can work on as well. Now, sometimes people say, I don't like that person because he's a killer. And then you say, oh, well, if you think that person is a killer, then you must be a killer too. No, no, no. The mind is far trickier than that. You're in the subtle tier, and the other person is talking about a concrete tier. So if you see that in somebody else, what you might be saying to them is saying to yourself, if I'm saying that, oh, I'm not a killer, so I'm not projecting, you could say to them, have you ever killed anybody's dreams? Have you ever killed anybody's self-respect? Have you ever killed anybody's heart? Have you ever done that? Do you do that now? The mind is a very tricky process, and kids start learning that at about the 2.0 stage, when they realize that what they see isn't what is true sometimes. So you have to watch these projections and make sure that you are really working from the tier that they're in, because you can dislike somebody that murders. On the other hand, why is that coming to their consciousness? Maybe it's because they have something that they are killing that's subtle or even meta-aware. So you would go through this process of looking at this diagram again. Okay. Now, what I want to have you all do, since you all picked out somebody and you picked out their projections, when you were a child, you picked out projections. When you're an adult, positive ones, you might think about some people that have, challenging, that you have challenging projections on. But I want to put you in a breakout group and have a chance, so you can have a chance to talk to each other about this. And we'll give you about, let's say, 7 or 8 minutes. 8 minutes? Can we do it in 8 minutes? Let's try it. And then I have another process that we're going to go through when you get back. Well, nice to see you all here again. Let me put myself on gallery. So a few comments is some of this feeling like it's too heady, or are you, do you have any questions that you want to ask, or is it feeling like it's starting to make sense now about how some of these things can integrate together by using this little matrix? Any comments that you want to make? Or feedback? Yes, Deborah.
Wow. Yeah, I thought this was really, really helpful. I've stared at this matrix a long time and just didn't sink in. So it's like understood the structure, but I just didn't. Going through that exercise, it was really helped me internalize it more. Wow. So I guess I have a question.
Okay.
And then the difference between being reciprocal and interpenetrating in terms of projections is, if at the reciprocal level, do you just take on a projection?
Pretty much. The thing is that you can't see your own projections, but you can see when other people are projecting on you.
Okay.
So when you have a directee that, or a client that tells you that you are X, Y, and Z, but they can't see it in themselves, you know that they haven't gotten to an interpenetrative level yet. Interpenetrative is a little harder to get, because that's when I see in some way that I am you. I'm not just in reciprocity with you. I am you in some way. It's a beginning of an understanding of oneness. And projections are that. I see a quality in you, and then I notice I have it in myself. We are one in that one area. It doesn't mean you've got a whole big spiritual oneness.
Mm-hmm.
Could have, though, because you can project spiritual things on other people too, and not even recognize that you've got those spiritual qualities in yourself.
So here's a question that then came up. In my mind, if someone is not taking on a projection, your projection onto them, is that, and they don't, let's say they're not that psychologically sophisticated, they're not keened into that word itself, but they just don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like someone could just have developed that way naturally.
Well, basically,
yeah. So go ahead.
When somebody projects on you and you don't feel like it's like it is you, a lot of times you feel an objection. It doesn't mean it isn't in you. It might mean that you just can't see it. But when somebody projects something on you that you know isn't true, then, a lot of people have the capacity to say, that's just not me. Thirdly, though, somebody will project something on you and it hits you and you say, oh, I know that's me. I do it. I'm sure it's me. Oh, I'm a bad person. Have you ever had anybody criticize you and then you just feel like you're wrong? When maybe you're not wrong. Maybe you're not wrong. Maybe you're interjecting it and taking it into yourself, and it isn't you at all. You don't want to take something negative into you that you don't already have. And even if you already have it, you might want to recognize that it's not you. And there are all kinds of psychological processes. Of course, that is a way for you to recognize it. Maybe you have some shadow work to do. But these shadows are at all these different developmental levels. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to get across, is that, shadow material comes up all the time in our spiritual practice. And that will hold you back. If you project something out that's good on somebody and you don't see it in yourself, then you can't develop that spiritual quality as well as and focus on it. If you, however, are projecting something, negative on somebody, you can look at yourself and decide and honestly reflect on yourself and really look deeply in there and realize you have that too. Lots of people can find those things in themselves. They just never thought about looking for them. So then you have the opportunity to clean it up by getting help with from other people, by asking people to remind you if you're doing it, by going to a psychotherapist and trying to find out why the heck it's there in the first place. Did you interject that from some other place? See, these shadows are things that hold you back, but they also hold back your development. And what I'm saying is that the developmental path, if you can identify the developmental path that somebody is on, you'll have a sense of knowing where you want to start talking with them at. If they have these different developmental levels that they're speaking at, and of course, you have to go way far into the matrix in order to understand what all those levels are, because I have an hour for something that's going to take a whole course to do, an hour and a half. And what I wanted to show you was that there is a matrix here that can help you kind of see what kind of perspectives people are taking. Perspectives are developmental, and they all interact with each other. If you have projections and interjections, if you have parts that are eating plates of cookies and stuff like that, and we all have those things, then it's good to know about it. But it's also good to know, a plate of cookies is a pretty concrete thing. Making a plan to meet a goal is a lot more subtle than that. So, you start getting a sense of what tier they're playing in. Now, we might talk about the MetaWare tier, but that's a really tricky tier in that you have to have later spiritual capacities in order to get into that tier. But you can get into those spiritual capacities without being MetaWare. Even children can get those spiritual capacities. So these MetaWare capacities are ones that are fairly advanced. There's not a lot of research on them. We've done quite a bit of research with them, but there are very, very few people that end up there, and they have to have like the capacity to experience awareness of awareness to get there. Can people experience awareness earlier than that? Yes, they can. But they might be at an earlier stage. Let's say they're at the achiever stage. Then they would have direct all of that awareness to achiever objects. Or they might be at this reciprocal stage. So they would direct all their awareness to those kinds of objects. Does that make sense, Deborah? So spirituality can happen all the way up and all the way down. It's just that you can't get into the MetaWare tier until you are starting to be spiritual. People don't have to be spiritual. A lot of people aren't. They don't feel spirituality until they get, all the way up through this 4.5 teal level. But you can't go any further. So you can see how spirituality and development interrelate. You can't develop without spiritual states, but you can have spiritual states at these earlier developmental levels too. So and the same is true. Now you can see that shadow is something that you can show where they are in their shadow development, because that's something that's going to hold you back from your spirituality, and it's also going to be something that holds you back from the development. And the way you show up, like last time you talked about, sexual ethics. So you could look and say, well, what tier does sexuality come up at? And, what tier does ethics come up at? Look at the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments comes up in the every end of the concrete tier. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And then there's the Buddhist path, which is the eightfold path, thou shalt, etc. So we have these universal kinds of processes that come up at these various times. And it's really important to recognize that lack of development can hold you and your spirituality to an earlier developmental level. Lack of shadow and recognizing your shadow is going to also hold you back developmentally and spiritually. And lack of your conduct is definitely going to hold you back spiritually. And there are parts of spiritualities where, different kinds of spirituality. Some you can get in this very wide, timeless, boundless space and lay around there all the time and let your family starve. Now, is that a full spirituality? That's not a full, robust spirituality, right? So what we're talking about here is a well-balanced developmental process, a well-balanced spiritual process, a well-healed
Shadow process.
shadow, and a mature conduct. They all go together, and they help. If you heal one, the rest of them will blossom. If you heal the other, they'll blossom more. If you keep them all in mind, they will blossom. But the development is one of the very key aspects. A very, very key aspect. So let me
Terry, let me jump in here. Doug, I see you've had your hand up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't. I'm sorry. Thank you, Doug. Go ahead. I'm not watching. Are you still there, Doug?
Maybe if we
Yeah, I am.
go ahead.
I just took a while to get to my mic.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating your way of framing this and the balancing. It's just such a nice, well-rounded approach to spirituality. And I've got a couple questions. One is the projection thing, where
Yeah.
your focus has been that it's like a shadow element of you that you're not owning. And I'm wondering if it could be a shadow element of your worldview, that it's not necessarily about your ego structure, but the world that you're living in, that you're picking that up, or if you have anything to say there. And then the other aspect is, can you say a little bit more about how doing shadow work facilitates your changing stages of development? Just where those actual interfaces occur, or how they might be impeding the development?
How shadows, well, let's say that you cannot see your projections. Projections can actually come up at the concrete tier. We just don't notice them very much. Let me give you an example. When I was in my very early, I was about 19 years old, I had a friend that asked me to go over to her house and help her put a party together. And when I went there, I looked at her kitchen, and her cupboards had streaks all down the front of them. And boy, I thought, man, what a dirty kitchen this woman has. I cannot believe it. So I helped her get her party ready, and I went home and opened the door and looked at my kitchen, and guess what I saw? Dirty streaks all the way down my kitchen cupboards. Well, then you can have the subtle projections. Then you can see, at some point, you can see meta-aware projections. You start understanding that maybe everything is a projection of the mind. If you can't see projections, can you get to one of the more developed understandings without being taught. In the meta-aware tier, you would start seeing that naturally. In some spiritual traditions, they start teaching projections much sooner, but not all of them. Some people have never heard of projections. So just understanding what projections are, the process of what they are, can help you grow up and start seeing the illusionary aspects of what we paste on reality all the time.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Okay, it does. So if I can paraphrase, just to make sure I'm following you. So you're saying the act of working on our projections forces the development, taking subject as object, which then moves us on to the next stage. Whether the object's concrete or subtle, we have to find a way of not being it in order to work with it, which then facilitates our development onto the next stage. Is that basically it?
Well, there's a lot of things that will stop you from developing, but shadows are one of them, because they'll pop up either in ego states or subpersonalities, or introjects or projections. Projections are not the only shadow. So sometimes you can get away with some minor projections, but some great big ones that you make, it may cause way more problems. And we've seen this with spiritual teachers. I've worked with quite a few spiritual teachers who have these wonderful, they bring these groups together, and they don't have sexual problems or any of that kind of thing, but they have aggrandizism, and they can project that out on everything that they do. And sometimes some of the things they do are not grand. Others may be way better and way more humble. Than other people see them. Other people may see them as being way, way, way more mature. And just by their conduct, and we're going to talk about conduct in a minute, I'm going to have to get to it pretty soon. This is where conduct comes in. Just by their conduct and projecting their conduct out on other people helps other people become more humble. So your conduct is, that's a two-way kind of process. It's a reciprocal process to start with. But at some point, you can see the humility in each other. When you get to the meta-aware tier, projection happens in the moment. So you can see the projection, you could see your projection of humility on the other person and say, I can see that I have some of that too. And recognize that it's not aggrandizism. It's a truth that you can support each other in. And then you can also see challenging projections that happen. And then you can say, gosh, I'm doing that too. Can we work on that together? So projections are something that you don't usually recognize until you get to about the teal level. When you get past the teal level, you see them in the moment, and then you can work on it together with people. You don't have to, you're not so far behind your projection that you can't that you can't take care of it right away. So we want to get to showing up now. Let's look at compassion, love, and gratitude. These are three really important areas that all show, if they do not grow up, then you have much less to give. So a little child has a sense of feeling sorry, but they don't have compassion yet. Then it moves to empathy. Then it moves to compassion, and compassion can come up at the achiever level. But when you continue to develop it, compassion, as well as love and gratitude, can be a timeless, changeless, boundless experience that goes beyond anything that the ordinary human mind can experience. You get it with a transpersonal mind. So development of compassion is going through the developmental levels of compassion, and love and gratitude are individual areas that are really important. Then when we have wisdom, here I put the word recognition out. Recognition is really important in all of these areas. In development, it's important to recognize the developmental stage you're in. It's important to recognize your shadow. It's important to recognize your spiritual states and stages, and also your conduct. And those all will grow up. Awareness itself grows up. Recognition grows up. And then often your speech, the way that you speak to people is a way of growing up. And all of those are aspects of wisdom. And then there's skillful means. This is your conduct. Can you make the right choices at the right time? Can you take right action once a choice is made? Those can grow up from concrete, going out and helping, feed people, to subtle, where you're offering people, the right kind of spiritual direction at the right time, to meta-aware, where you can continue that work with people at very late developmental levels, where they have not only developmental objects that are universal, but they also have developmental states, and how those combine is just very, very profound. So this is how you show up with people. And so the way we show up also develops. So I wanted to show you an example of how this might work in everyday life. My brother, who is an organic farmer, put up a sign outside of our little town, Lewistown, and it said, "God bless Joe Biden." And this is a picture of what happened to it. Somebody chopped his sign down. So this is how he took right action. This is how he worked with his projections. This is what he did with that. And it's one of the just very positive ways. He wrote a letter to the editor and he said, I recently saw a sign along the highway. It read, "God bless Joe Biden." The sign quite impressed me with its positive message. Even with all the identity politics and hateful bickering between the right and left, surely any good, God-loving Christian would want God to bless the president of this amazing country. So I offered to pay for a sign with a positive prayer asking God to bless our president. I thought if everyone said this simple prayer as they drove by that sign, maybe our community can become a bit less hateful and divisive towards one another, and maybe it will help our president make good decisions. Recently, this sign was cut down. It was hurtful to me on a personal basis. I was angry. I wanted someone to be accountable and suffer for what they did. It didn't take me long to realize that's exactly how partisan, hateful bickering is perpetrated. So I say to those who cut that sign down and those that supported it in any way, may God bless you. And please don't cut our sign down again. And if you have a problem with it, let's talk about it rather than resort to violence. So you see, he caught his projection in the moment. He switched it around and he's blessing the perpetrators. That doesn't happen very often. Not only that, he put it in the newspaper. Not only that, he put the sign back up again, and it's been 6 or 8 months now, and nobody has chopped that sign down, although I'm sure many people have wanted to. So this is, it's this kind of individual action that we can take during our lives. He recognized his projection, and he wrote in such a way that people could see how he changed his mind. These are the kinds of good deeds that we can do. He saw his shadow. He certainly improved his conduct. So I will spend the rest of the time with Q&A here, and I need to stop this share.
Someone in the chat wrote something along the lines of, why do we have to deal with all this complicated stuff? If we can just sit in samadhi for a little while, all these things will be taken care of automatically. And he and I were both in the same spiritual movement for decades. And I know people who've been meditating and experiencing samadhi for 40, 50 years who are still dealing with all these, shortcomings that are implied in what you said today. So I'd like to hear what your comments are on that.
Questionable that it's samadhi.
Well, samadhi is a concentration practice, right?
It's a state of pure awareness. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yes. But the thing is, it's not very embodied. And embodiment, we are human beings. We have children, we have parents, we have people on the street, we have, if it's a Buddhist kind of samadhi, the whole idea of Buddhism and Christianity, really, most of the spiritual paths are to help all beings, be enlightened or get to heaven. And when you're sitting in samadhi and your children are starving because you're not out working, I wouldn't say that that's good conduct. This is why I'm saying there's 4 different stages, 4 different areas. 4 different areas that we bring together, and we don't want to leave any one of them out. We don't want to leave conduct out. Your spiritual path is really important, and you all know that. You don't want to leave out checking on your shadow, and and then development, because all of these things develop. Actually, if you get a bad shadow when you're young, it can be developed to be even worse as you grow up. Your shadow can actually grow up with you. So it's important to take care of it, because instead of being a little shadow, it can turn out to be a very big shadow. And we can see people that's probably happened to in our politics. And yet, what do we do with the people in our politics like that? Do we have any of that part in ourselves? Have we ever lied? Have we ever stole somebody's idea? Have we ever done any of those things of the people that we have struggles with in our politics? Have we ever done any of those things ourselves? The best way we can handle that is to change our conduct. And to change our conduct, we might have to change our shadow, because that may be a shadow element. And it also maybe helped us to grow up so that we can learn to be in reciprocity with the people that we struggle with the most. Instead of going away from those folks, can we go towards them in a way that we can? I mean, it's this kind of thing, that these 4 elements coming together. And what I'm telling you is that I know one of them really well. I'm working on the others, but gosh, I have work to do here. I think we all do, but one of these areas I know pretty well, and I know that it seems complicated, but I can tell you that it is a spiritual path in itself, because even the earlier stages need some kind of capacity that will open up into spirituality in order to move through the spiritual paths. For instance, a baby, one of the first states a baby has is peekaboo. Now, you don't think of a peekaboo as a state, but have you ever watched a baby play peekaboo? They are absolutely in a state. They are laughing and screaming so hard, their tears are coming out of their eyes when you jump up from behind something. But what does peekaboo help them learn to do? After a while, they don't do that anymore. Why not? Because you have helped them learn to visualize. Visualization is a very important part of thinking. Visualization is a very important part of metacognition. Metacognition turns into parts. You have to have awareness to see parts. these things gradually come together so that you get to a place where you can't even get into the next stage unless you start having these very deep spiritual places. And I can't teach that to you in an hour and a half.
Carrie, this is a great time to ask a question that came up earlier because you're already addressing it, which is really, I think, one of your unique contributions to this field, this very long, beautiful field of this interplay between states and stages. So you gave us this example of how a baby learning peekaboo is actually in some sort of spiritual state, learning the next stage, learning how to visualize, which is going to be learning about thinking and and as you stated so beautifully. So just in a few minutes left, tell us a little bit about states and stages, how the stage that we're growing into is the state we're experiencing literally as a spiritual, we might call in this group. And yes, we define things differently, but we still have to try and communicate. And so how we experience these spiritual states, which then become a stage and don't blow our mind anymore. There's something new that blows our mind. So can you speak about that?
Well, let's just start with the age, we can start even with the states and the learning that children need to get. So you can see how early they can get these spiritual states. They have to be able to see ordinary phenomena in order to see sacred phenomena. They have to get that there are ordinary boundaries in order to see sacred boundaries and sacred boundlessness. They have to have an ordinary self before they can find a sacred self. They have to get ordinary time in order to move into that sacred, silent timelessness that you get in samadhi. And they have to have an ordinary mind to get a sacred mind. They get all of these things by the time they're 8 years old. They get ordinary phenomena, ordinary boundaries, ordinary self, ordinary time, ordinary mind. They have the capacity to have all of this after that. But with each stage that grows up, there's more phenomena that they can see than they can when they're at the concrete tier. There's subtle phenomena, there's meta-aware phenomena. There are more boundaries that they can be boundless from. For instance, the boundlessness of your limiting beliefs. Those are boundaries. Can you take the boundaries off from your limiting beliefs? Can you take your boundaries off your assumptions? It's not just projections. Can you take them off from your interpretations? Then the sacred self, you go from the ordinary self to the sacred self, you can have a very sacred feeling self when it comes to the subtle tier, and you can get some very, very advanced states there with timeless, boundless, changeless knowing and all of that sort of thing. But you can have it at an achiever level where you're still competing with people. You can have it at a pluralist level where you are, where you're in a, for those of you that know the integral frame, you have a green frame. And then there's the ordinary mind and the sacred mind. They grow up. These will grow up through the developmental stages, and people can start having them at the ages of 8. And I checked this out with Dan Brown when he was working with me on this material. He was a Harvard psychotherapist and spiritual teacher of the 10th degree. And he helped me with a lot of this work. But that might answer some of the processes that I'm trying to get to here.
Terry, thank you so much. This is a big topic. Just to close with remembering, we are all of the stages. We are all of the states, inside and out. This grows like Russian dolls, that we have them as parts inside of us. We see them in our world. The more we can understand how relative reality functions, the more effectively we can interact with relative reality using our wisdom of spirituality or ultimate reality, however that arises for you. So if, lots of resources, you can look up Terry O'Fallon and many, many other practitioners using this model. If you'd like to learn more, this is just a tiny little taste. And we want to invite you to join ASI as a member. If you have not done that already, please do that. You'll get information and access quickly in that way. Also, we are a nonprofit organization with a very limited budget. All of us are doing this out of the mission. So please, if this has been impactful or helpful for you, go ahead to the Spiritual Integrity site and make a donation. Sign up for our newsletter too, so you can stay on top of things. And go over to Stages International if you want more research and background on Terry's theory and the validation that has come through the scientific journals and all of that at stagesinternational.com. And did I remember everything, Jack?
Yeah, just to thank Terry. And if there's any other thing you'd like to add, Terry, I know if anybody else wants her thesis, her new version of the thesis, just please put it in the chat if you haven't already, and we'll send out PDF or whatever format it comes. Terry, any last word that you'd like to have people follow you, or anything else you'd like to say?
I'm just grateful for all of you. Look what you're doing. You're helping people grow in their spiritual life. And that is one of the most important aspects that we can ever do. And my main purpose here was to help us all reflect on how important it is for all 5 of these areas to be well-rounded, because any one of them can stop. And, each one of these, you all know how much it's taken you to get where you are with your spiritual work. And each one of these areas takes just as much work. So I'm challenging you and encouraging you to learn a lot about all of the rest of the areas. Learn about conduct and how compassion and love and gratitude and all of these other things can grow up through the stages. Development, the spiritual stages, your shadow, those, and how to recognize just the outline of those 4 things, and then learning how to recognize, because you can have all of them, and if you don't recognize it, it doesn't help at all. So practice your recognizing, your awareness. That's going to bring so much more to the fore. And each one of these categories can take a lifetime, but learn enough about each one of them to see if you can interact with them and integrate them all a little bit. Thank you so much, everyone. Much appreciated. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everybody. Till next time.